here to learn and hear from our speakers today on their case studies. Okay, great. Thank you all so much for responding to that. We'll get started in 1 minute. Again, for everyone who's just joining, welcome to the webinar. We're just having folks share in the chat, what your name is, where you're joining from, and answer the question of whether you already have a campaign going on in your city, whether you're just starting one, or whether you're just here to learn. And we'll get started very, very soon. And just for folks joining, just some ground rules for our chat. This is an anti-oppressive space, so any racism, Zionism, sexism, Islamophobia, any oppressive language in the chat will result in an automatic ejection from the event. Harassment will not be tolerated. And we do want you to connect with each other, but please just be mindful of the size of the event. So try to use the chat to only respond to prompts and questions. But if you want to follow up with a specific participant, you can just reply to them privately. And if you experience any issues, you can let us know. You can message USCPR support and let us know if you're experiencing any problems. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Yes, I can adjust my camera. All right, thank you all so much for joining. It's helpful to see where people are at, seeing a lot of people here who are joining us to learn and or like starting a campaign. So that's really helpful. Again, so my name is Celine. I'm with the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. Today we have a really exciting webinar for you all. We're going to be hearing from two of our USCPR fellows who are going to be talking to us about how they organized their really incredible local campaigns. And it's going to help us really learn about ways that we can take up divestment and the apartheid-free communities campaign. So our objectives today are really to offer up these case studies as lessons to help us learn about concrete steps we can take to organize on a citywide level for Palestine. And I just want to begin, as always, with some political grounding. On late Monday evening, Israel resumed its all-out genocidal war on Gaza. Within hours, Israel martyred around 400 Palestinians. Multiple schools in the north of Gaza were leveled, along with a large family house in Deir al-Balah and displacement tents west of Khan Yunis. And these attacks, we all know, are carried out with the full backing and support of the US government. And this also came after Israel refused to abide by the original terms of the ceasefire. The ceasefire was supposed to enter phase 2 at the beginning of March. And instead, for the last 2 weeks, Israel has completely cut off humanitarian aid, fuel, electricity, and carried out countless killings of Palestinians across Gaza. So this renewal of all-out war comes against the backdrop of further escalations in the West Bank as Israel moves forward with its plans for annexation. And also we're seeing an expanded attack on the Palestine movement in the US. And the objective is clear that wherever we're seeing these attacks happen, whether it's in the region, in Palestine, or right here where we are, their goal is genocide, ethnic cleansing, and the liquidation of the Palestinian struggle with silence from the rest of the world. But I also just want to say that what we're seeing with these attacks on our movement in the US, this is a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of strength. The reason that the Zionists and the US government is moving with such desperation is because they're trying to silence our movement. They're trying to level threats. They're trying to threaten us with deportation and criminalization. But the reason this is happening is because our movement has grown in a really massive way. It's because of the gains that we made over the past 16, 17 months, because our movement continues to grow and because we've gained power. And we've been able to gain really concrete wins through our organizing. We're going to learn about some of those wins today, but we also wanted all of us here need to recommit to really putting all of our efforts behind continuing to organize for the end of the genocide, to take to the streets, to organize for divestment and push for a total arms embargo. Like, this is what this moment requires of us. So with that, we can go to the next slide. I'm gonna, and the next slide after that. Thank you. Yeah. I just want to share a few, just before we begin, some general divestment tips that were shared with us by the American Friends Service Committee, who have a really good website where you can learn more about divestment, and they also hold weekly office hours for people to go and ask questions. The goal with divestment is to get a city, university, church, trade union, pension fund, whatever institution, to withdraw its investments in corporations and banks complicit in the Zionist genocide and human rights violations. Selling an institution's shares or refusing to reinvest in a company is the implementation side of it. But one of the most effective ways to get like a long-standing divestment win is to push your target, whether that's a city or an institution, to adopt an investment policy, like an ethical investment policy. That would stipulate that this city or this institution will not invest or contract with companies complicit in human rights violations. So this would allow you to, not only focus on the companies that you want to target directly, but it would prevent future investments in companies that may fall under this criteria of like human rights violations or supporting the arms trade, and genocide. When campaigning for something like an ethical investment policy, you want to make sure that whatever your campaign is, you're always pushing a clear timeline and implementation plan as well. And again, the implementation of a policy like this would include selling direct investments in stocks or bonds of companies on the divest list, engaging with investment managers to make sure that you're identifying or your city is creating pooled funds that comply with the new policy, and pushing for a process to periodically review investments to make sure they're aligned with an ethical investment policy. So I think in general for all of our campaigns, because I'm seeing a lot of people here that are interested in learning or just kind of starting a campaign, it's really important that not only do you know like what kind of corporations you want to go after, but like you need to power map your target. So whether it's the city council, whether it's the county treasurer, whether it's the board of a religious institution, or whatever institution that you want to divest, it's important that we know who the individuals are that make up these leadership bodies. And yeah, we'll email everything in a follow-up email, so don't worry about missing anything that I have listed here. So we want to make sure that we know who the individuals are. Is there anyone you can identify that could actually support your divestment campaign? So let's say you want to take on a city council. Is there someone who's actually like friendly in some way and can help you actually like get your demands on the agenda? And it's also important to know, like, is there an investment policy? Like, so for example, on your city level, like there is an investment policy, but what is it? Like, is what regulations do they abide by? What do they not adhere to? For some institutions, it's only about profitability. For some, there are ethical considerations, ethical guidelines. Maybe those ethical guidelines are missing a point about, not wanting to be, maybe they're missing points about human rights violations, and maybe they're only focused on environmental, for example. So maybe you want to campaign around that. And again, the power mapping is just helpful for us to be able to start having conversations with supportive people, either different organizations or individuals, in advance to help you prepare for your campaign. And we can go to the next slide. This one's really wordy. Don't worry about capturing it. We will send this out, and it is on the BDS website. But there are other options as well for y'all to take up in your city. So you could do an institutional boycott where your city can boycott complicit BDS targets at an institutional level. So for example, let's say you want to take on Chevron, you can pursue like a citywide pledge to not fill city-owned vehicles at Chevron gas stations. You can also work on severing ties with sister cities, sister cities in quote unquote Israel, right? So by declaring your city an apartheid-free zone, you can like build popular support to end sister city relations. You can organize for apartheid-free cities. We'll hear more about that. Again, building popular support among the community to call on elected officials to declare your city as an apartheid-free city, and this is something that can actually help consolidate all efforts, divestment, boycott, all of these things. And then of course there's like the different forms of boycott, like you have cultural, where you can make sure like you can get for example, let's say there's like a festival that's being hosted and there's some Zionist institution that's sponsoring it and you want them to drop the sponsorship. And then academic boycott, of course, which is when an academic association or a university ends institutional collaboration with Israeli academic institutions. So just want to lay all of this out because before we begin, as just some general tips, general resources, and we'll send all the materials in the chat. You can find these on the BDS website and on the AFSC website. And again, we'll send things out in a follow-up email. Okay, I'm done with that part. So I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists. Samia is a Palestinian American organizer and a community mental health worker based in southern Vermont. Samia comes from a lineage of activists who stand in resistance to settler colonialism and injustice in Palestine and globally. She believes deeply in the power of grassroots community organizing to shift public consciousness and generate systemic change. Samia received their BA from Swarthmore College and an MA in clinical psychology from Goddard College, where they focused on decolonizing, healing, and mental health work. And then we have Noel, who is a Palestinian American organizer based in Cleveland, Ohio. She's a member of the Palestinian Youth Movement and an organizer with the Cleveland Palestine Advocacy Community and a board member for the Interreligious Task Force on Central America. So while her work focuses on Palestinian liberation, she believes in bridging the intersectionality of joint struggles with other minority groups, with recognition that we are all fighting the same systems of oppression and that none of us are free until we're all free. So just before I pass it to you, Noel, I'm just going to ask if we can just do a quick poll. Just want to also visualize where everyone is at with their campaigns. So also, like, if you guys have some thoughts that you want to add based on where people are at with their own campaigns in the room, you can share that. So we'll launch a poll real quick to just, again, get a sense of where you're at with your campaigns. And we'll take like maybe 30 seconds to fill this out. Okay, amazing. All right, I think we can maybe pause the poll, but it really looks like most people are here to learn how to start a campaign and just here to learn. And we have some people who've already started a campaign and then few who are in the middle or have already won. So just so you all are aware, and if you want to address kind of like who's in the room. So Noel, I'm going to pass it to you first. If you can please walk us through, like, what was your campaign strategy? Like, tell us about your campaign. What was the strategy, and what were like, how did you engage and mobilize your community to take action? And what were there any tactics specifically that you felt were particularly effective in persuading the county to take action around your campaign?
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Really excited to talk about our campaign and the journey and how we can all like collectively work together for divestment. I always like to kind of start out talking about post October 7th here in Cleveland. Our work really began at the city level. We pushed for 17 weeks for a ceasefire resolution at Cleveland City Council. And it was throughout that campaign that we put a lot of effort into base building, building relationships in the community and coalition building. And so then once we were able to get that win, of the ceasefire resolution, we could carry over this energy and momentum that we had been building for 17 weeks, giving us credibility as an organization to achieve wins and kind of set us off with a good foundation for this next divestment campaign. And so what kicked off our divestment campaign was a series of public records requests, research, and conversations with those we had been building at the city level that brought these bonds to life. We found out that Cuyahoga County, which covers the northeast area of Ohio, holds $16 million in Israel bonds, something that many of us in the community were unaware were even being held by the county. And so once we were set on the research part of it, we began attending county meetings regularly. We showed up every Tuesday for their biweekly meetings. We began to meet with council members specifically to see who were our allies, who knew what information went into the decision making for Israel bonds. Because one thing we had learned at the city level that transferred over to the county level is that there is this disconnect in understanding of how our government bodies function. There's oftentimes this illusion of democracy when in reality, decisions are made with a smaller group of people or even one individual who makes the decision. So getting an understanding of how the county functioned was one of our first strategies in trying to push this divestment campaign forward. I would also say that in trying to keep up this momentum, we were rallying around specific maturation dates. And I'll talk a little bit about this later with the win that we received most recently. But in keeping up the momentum and keeping our community engaged, having set deadlines of these maturation dates that the county had in order to keep people focused in these kind of long-term strategies for divestment is extremely important. Divestment is a long-term strategy, and having these dates helps keep people more focused and sustained in the long run. And so once we were able to kind of learn the lay of the land of the county and find out that the decisions were made from an investment advisory committee, and specifically our county executive is the one who made the decisions, we were able to shift our strategies to fit more align in targeting those specific people and those specific groups. And so this turned into having more consistency and showing up both at county meetings and outside of county meetings as well, which again provided a way for our community to engage in multiple ways. We had people showing up to give public comment. We had people showing up on weekends for demonstrations. We would do house calls. We had a petition going around, gathering signatures for support for divestment. And then we also built up our own infrastructure as well during this time, which I think was extremely important in helping sustain us. We invited people to join us in our CPAC meetings every Tuesday, where we did our strategizing and then broke into different working pods in order to develop us both internally as a coalition and then externally, how are we best reaching the community to popularize this campaign. Israel bonds are kind of a foreign topic to people. And so being able to make these connections of bringing our money out of the genocidal regime and back into Cuyahoga County was simple messaging that a lot of people were able to get behind.
That was so good and concise. I think just some lessons from this is just to reiterate, really consistent engagement of the community. And like that was like a consistent focus and priority of the coalition. You guys were focused both on the internal development of the coalition as well as like the strategy to actually like win the divestment campaign. And then you guys power mapped. So you like figured out like who are the real decision makers that we really need to prioritize and go after. So that was really helpful, Noel. Thank you. Okay, Samia, I want to ask you the kind of similar question. If you can tell us about your campaign and kind of briefly walk us through your campaign strategy, and like kind of like what were key turning points that you felt like helped you all gain momentum. And then I know you also used a lot of different tactics, canvassing, video content. Like what do y'all feel was like the most effective in getting people engaged?
Thanks, Celine. Thanks, everybody. It's so rad to be here and see the engagement in the chat. So thanks for listening. Again, my name is Samia, and I organize in Southern Vermont. I'm from the Bay Area, though. Shout out to some folks I saw in the chat. I'm from the Bay. I organize with two groups. One is like a statewide coalition, and the other is more focused on the South. So our strategy for this campaign, which we just been calling the Apartheid-Free Community Campaign, was to get as many towns in Vermont as possible to adopt the Apartheid-Free Community Pledge, which is language that originated with the American Friends Service Committee. It's very available online. We'd been building this campaign for over a year leading up to March 4th, which is something called Town Meeting Day in Vermont, which is a really important time for local elections and for residents to vote on things like municipal budgets, ballot measures, articles, make municipal decisions about how towns are run. We pretty early on had done research into figuring out if Vermont has Israel bonds and figured out that that was not true, but did feel that there was space for divestment work. And so the Apartheid-Free Community Campaign was sort of like a gauge and a temperature check to figure out, to sort of like lay the groundwork and build some traction and momentum for divestment, longer term divestment campaigns. So we felt that slightly more than a year-long campaign was like a reachable goal and trying to get it in as many towns as possible. So I offer that up just for folks. A lot of folks here sound like they're kind of exploring what the options are and just starting out on things. We basically had like a statewide level campaign that was run through the Vermont Coalition for Palestinian Liberation. That's our statewide organizing body. And then different towns kind of developed their own campaigns out of that with like slightly different flavors and slightly like different issues and different tactics that they were using. And our goal overall was to popularize the Palestine movement and build support for divestment, like I said, at the state level, and also build the appetite for longer term BDS campaigns. I would say like a key turning point was in Burlington, which is the largest town in Vermont. It's about 45,000 people. Organizers brought the AFC language to city council twice, 2 years in a row, both times with way over the amount of signatures they needed in petitioning to get to get AFC put on the ballot, and both times it was denied by the council. So at the second time, which was last year, that definitely was a moment where organizers were like, let's try to bring this to as many towns as possible and sort of shame Burlington for doing that. I would say, so in my home community, which is Brattleboro, like I said, in the South, and just for comparison's sake, population down here is like around 12,000. It's a pretty rural community compared to 45,000 in Burlington, around 8,000 in Montpelier, which is the capital city. And we built our campaign to really interweave with local issues, really seeking to make solidarity with Palestine a local issue, partially by tying US and Vermont spending on the genocide and Israeli weapons, and to the lack of social programs and infrastructure in Vermont, including like lack of housing, health and mental health care, and rebuilding from climate catastrophe. We've had 2 years of pretty devastating floods. But the biggest tactic we used was canvassing, and going like deep canvassing style. We went door to door, we did leafleting, we developed outreach flyers and social media graphics that tied apartheid-free communities' work with education about apartheid and also other local items on the ballot, which we felt would be bad for our communities, like focusing on policing and carceral systems. And at the statewide level, one of the core organizers made a really rad video that was circulated on social media, again, talking about why AFC is relevant and important. So I would say like a lot of our tactics focused on political education and awareness raising and just really getting out in the street and being with people and talking to them about Palestine.
Thank you so much, Samia. That was really helpful too, because I think like the messaging piece about like making sure that you're connecting your campaign to very local issues so that people can like really localize Palestine and like really understand why this affects everybody in your guys' locale. I wanted to also ask Noel, like back to you. Your campaign also involved direct engagement with elected officials, including like city council meetings and like the mobilization that you talked about really consistently. What lessons did you learn about navigating local government and like applying pressure, and like what you felt was like the strongest tactic that got the county to take action?
Yeah, so as I kind of touched on briefly, what we recognized kind of at the city level, which transferred over to county, was just how dysfunctional our government bodies are. When we started going to county council meetings, we realized that some of the council members didn't even know that these bonds existed, and were unaware of who made the decision for them, that if they could vote on them or not. We did have 2 members of the council put forward a resolution in June for divestment, and due to Zionist pressure, ended up pulling it back. And so we continued to try to develop relationships with the council members that we felt were more aligned with us or were allies in some way. And then we're able to power map more specifically the investment advisory committee, and the executive is the one who's making the decisions. We showed up at the state of the county where the executive was speaking, and we're able to get him to make a statement saying that the county was not going to be moving away from bonds, which kind of solidified for us that he was opposing to us and in opposition, and someone that we needed to target and pressure. And so from there, we were able to kind of diversify our tactics a little bit, of continuing to go to county to give public comment, but then also having outside demonstrations as well, focusing specifically on the executive, like having sit-ins outside of his office or having demonstrations outside of his home. And so what we learned kind of throughout this whole process is that being able to effectively power map who are the key players in the decision-making process at the county level or even at the state level is what's going to be most effective in informing the decisions that you're making regarding tactics or the strategies that you want to use to push the divestment campaign forward. And then being able to apply pressure everywhere you can. We didn't really pick one way. It was just kind of any way that we were able to, whether it was trying to have private meetings with council members or continuing to show up in mass at the council meetings to show our presence is still here. And then while also trying to consistently meet with the county executive, who to this day has actually still refused to meet with our community.
Wow, okay. That's really good. Like helpful context to take up multiple tactics at the same time to build pressure. I want to bring it back to you, Samia, too. Like 5 out of 9 Vermont towns passed the ballot measure. What factors do you feel like contributed to success in those places, and like what lessons did you learn from areas where the measures failed? Because I feel like your guys' base building and messaging was really, really strong. So it'd be helpful to hear, your learned lessons from that aspect of the campaign.
For sure. Yeah, I think we found that in the towns that successfully adopted the article, there were 2 things that really seemed to make a difference. One being there was like a centralized coordinating committee that was doing the work of figuring out strategy. And 2, like on that coordinating committee, having local residents who are participating, who like really knew the town and had relationships. The towns that were less successful ultimately didn't have local people working on them, which posed issues on a lot of levels, like logistically related to coordination, and also like in many places, like rural places, relationships are everything. And so it was really helpful for building trust and like getting out there in the community. And I also just want to say, and I saw some comments in the chat, like some town municipalities were definitely more favorable towards the initiative than others. So kind of some of this was a learning experience for us to figure out like what specifically was the resistance to apartheid-free getting on the ballot. So for example, in Brattleboro, our town select board stuck to the statutes, which say that if you get enough petitions or enough signatures on a petition, then it goes to the ballot. Whereas in Burlington, even though the organizers definitely got enough signatures and they were all verified, the council was against it based on a lot of things, but primarily Zionism. So it was definitely a good rubric for us to figure out like and sort of map and power map the state in terms of where the ground is soft for us to be doing longer term boycott and divestment stuff. Celine, I forget if there was another question.
No, that was, I think, a perfect answer. This is really impressive, actually, and it's a good lesson, because I think like something that we talk about a lot is, we can have like, a really good campaign planned on a technical level or even like on a strategic level, but like you also need like a strong organization to hold it, or a strong coalition to hold it. And you also need like relationships, like with any type of campaigning or organizing, like the foundation really is going to be the relationships we have with people to be able to popularize what we're trying to do, and get a base that can back your efforts. And that also that these coalitions last beyond these campaigns, which is what you're saying, basically, like you guys ran this campaign and now you kind of know where to really like push for divestment. So I want to just bring it back to Noel. I think my final questions for you all, and then if you all have questions for our speakers, I think we will actually have like some time to be able to ask them. So please send them in the Q&A feature in the chat. For Noel, the county, and this is a huge win, like the county agreed to freeze $3 million in Israel bonds, but still holds $16 million. So can you talk to us a little bit about like what are the next steps for the campaign, and to ensure full divestment? And I think in general also like what you all are kind of planning to do in the next few months.
Yeah, so just a little context for that 3 million, kind of as I was describing before, there are different maturation dates that have been coming with these bonds that we've been kind of rallying against. And so on March 1st, there was 3 million that was set to mature. And we actually got an inside scoop from our relationships with some of the council members that they were thinking about not reinvesting. And so they decided to freeze this 3 million. And so what that means is that they didn't reinvest the 3 million that they had set to mature for these Israel bonds. But what it is not, or what it's not, is a commitment to not reinvest. And so we took it as a win, obviously, that while they were saying in articles that it was due to cash liquidity and that they didn't have the finances and that it wasn't politically related at all, we had no doubt that it was due to the pressure that we had been consistently putting for the past 18 months that informed this decision. And so going from here is keeping going. We want to get some type of legislative piece that has a firm commitment for them not to reinvest. There is a second maturation date that is coming up in December, where they could likely reinvest the 3 million if they decide that they have the money to spend on it. And so we had kind of a debrief meeting these past couple of weeks where we were able to talk about kind of the pros and cons of our strategies these past couple months, and came up with ideas of how we want to spend these next couple months moving forward. And what that's going to look like for us is continuing to build internally in our coalition, building up skills training. So in things like our own security and de-escalation in areas that we as organizers and in our coalition need to build up skills. And then also building up our external, how are we better being in the community and popularizing this campaign, holding regular events that aren't coming to council meetings and being able to connect with the community to build this people power. So by the time we are coming back in September, October, November, et cetera, that we have these people power in order to effectively pressure the county to not reinvest. And so we also are planning a No New Bonds conference, like a statewide conference with other areas as well, and trying to bridge these connections more broadly. We've been in communication with other areas and other counties in Ohio that are also working on divestment campaigns. And so being able to bridge this connection and thinking even further ahead and being able to divest not only at the county level, but then eventually at the state level as well for Ohio. And so we are very excited for this immediate freeze. We're taking it as a win. We've controlled the narrative for our community that yes, like we did this for our pressure, even if it's just a freeze for now. Being able to control that narrative with the community is the best way, I think, for us in order to be able to continue to move forward and keep this energy and momentum of our community, and seeing that the pressure that we apply as a group of people is effective in the decision making that's coming from our county.
Yeah, I think this is really a good point. Like it is a result of community pressure. I mean, these people in these positions don't just like wake up one day and decide they're going to make like a huge change. Like this happens because of community pressure and because of consistency. So I think this all sounds really exciting. And again, if anyone's in Ohio or in the Midwest and wants to, be at this conference, stay tuned for that. That sounds really great. And I think just really want to emphasize too, like, there's always going to be lulls and like ebbs and flows in campaigning and in like movement building work. And what's going to help you, like once you get over the initial peaks, like before you get to the next one, you need to be laying the groundwork and building the foundation. And a lot of that is going to look like engaging your base, strengthening your organization on an internal level, strong messaging, popularization of your work, so that when the next moment comes where you have to mobilize and you have to be prepared, you're actually ready to do so, and you've actually expanded your work. So I think that's also an important lesson from what both of you are saying, actually, like, just being able to reach people and build relationships with them and be able to sustain them throughout the kind of the ebbs and flows of like the work that you all are doing. Okay, now my last question for Samia before we pass it to the audience. Is basically like, how does your coalition now, also kind of like around next steps, how does your coalition plan to translate these votes into, divestment at the city or state level, and kind of like what's next for your campaign as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think so. After our debrief as a statewide group, we decided to form a BDS committee, like a working group, to look into how we can develop concrete goals out of these wins. And that will be like working simultaneously with ongoing goals that the different towns want to do. So the folks that won AFC in their towns will probably be moving towards some like smaller BDS targets over the next year or so, and figuring out goals around that. And that will all feed into sort of this overarching sense of like trying to get the state more on board with divestment. And for the towns that didn't win or that didn't try, there's like a lot of lessons learned that we're going to be passing along and trying to help folks bulk up skills for next town meeting day if they want to get their town on board. So I think that's like sort of our statewide local strategy. And then we're also going to be hosting a mass call at some point to support organizers in other municipalities who are interested in adopting something like this campaign in their towns or cities, and just sharing out strategies and creating space for folks to organize and share strategy together. Yeah.
That's perfect. Okay, so two things that y'all can join, the conference in Ohio and this mass call that Samia is putting together to just exchange more for people. And I think this is a good next step if any of you are interested in doing something similar around apartheid-free communities to attend this mass call. Again, if you all have questions for Samia and Noel, please send them in the Q&A feature. I pulled a couple that maybe we can start with. One is, I don't remember which of you talked about this, but can you explain the house calls that you mentioned as part of the divestment campaign? I think maybe Noel, it was you.
Yeah, so after kind of doing this like lay of the land power mapping of county council and finding out that the executive is the one that we needed to pressure, we started doing like noise demos and like demonstrations outside of his home as a way to like apply pressure to him to not only divest, but to meet with our community. We have been trying to meet with him since the start of our like divestment campaign. And we noticed that he was avoiding county council meetings, showing up after public comment, after we would already speak, and then would kind of run out of the room as soon as he could to get away from us. And so doing these house calls, showing up in the streets outside of his home was one of the tactics that we decided to use to pressure him to meet with us, and then for our divestment campaign as well. And so that looked like inviting the community to come out and protest, which again kind of mobilized our community in a different way versus just attending county council meetings, and then looked like noise demonstrations as well.
Thank you so much, Noel. There's also a question for, I think, both of you. It sounds like a diversity of tactics was definitely the way to go for both campaigns. That being said, are there any specific tactics that you both would recommend, either maybe against repeating based on your own experience? And then I would add to that, like, what are the things that you feel like are really good to repeat? Like whether it's like, especially like around maybe like community gatherings or things like that. So yeah, hopefully that question is clear, and we'll pass it to either of you.
I could say, like, I don't know that we used tactics that I wouldn't repeat, but I do feel that there was like a lot of space for poly-ed events, political education, like events, and trying to like gather people in different groupings, like trying to maybe get outside the box in terms of like who we know our supporters to be, and creating more space for dialogue. I always wish that we did more of that, and I definitely felt that for this campaign. There was just like go, go, go all the time. And in terms of like what we would definitely repeat, and what I personally really want to deepen skills in, is canvassing work and deep canvassing, figuring out how to have conversations with people that support making change and moving from like passive neutral to ally.
That's great. And maybe another question as well is, so there's a question about how do we develop community critical mass to individually boycott companies, because we're talking about pressure on government, institutions. I think just something to know around that question is, I think you're still building up when you're popularizing a campaign around like, where our money is going and things like that, you're still building up like awareness and an understanding of that among your base. And I think that helps with things like individual boycotts. So even if you have this like campaign where you're targeting, a specific institution, that work you're doing on a community level is going to help open things up to a lot more potential for organizing around Palestine beyond the campaign that you're working on. So I don't know if either of you want to say anything about that, or talk about, I think maybe a little bit like more in depth about like the way you guys engaged community around your campaigns. But yeah, just want to open it up in case anyone else has thoughts to add.
I guess the one thing I would add, like regarding that, is a lot of like the work we've been doing like throughout this campaign is building with like other coalitions that are working on community needs in our Cuyahoga County area. And so when we're talking to individuals, we really kind of approach them in this angle of like, where are you seeing deficits and gaps in the community where $16 million could be spent? We kind of actually did this whole display during one of our State of the County protests where we handed out $16 million like fake money to people and asked like what they would spend $16 million on in the county if they could. And so kind of like helping people like envision like where this money could go if it was invested back into the county. And I think that just gets people to start thinking more critically and just envisioning what our communities could look like if our governments spent the money the way that they should be. And that's like for the community and for our tax dollars to be used responsibly. And so that's one thing that we've been trying to approach in this angle while we're coalition building with like other groups that are in the community that are doing work for the community and for individuals, and being able to tie these connections of our tax dollars being used for genocide versus our tax dollars being used for school deficits or healthcare deficits, food deserts, other things like that. And so being able to make those connections.
That's such a creative tactic, and I think people in the chat are really loving that. I think that's something that can be easily replicated in so many places. And I think just a last question, maybe we'll pull from the audience before I answer some of the other ones in the resources section, and maybe for Samia actually. In rural communities or like in places where there might be like heavy conservative, pro-Zionist populists, like were there any any steps that you all took to address areas where you actually didn't have a base, or like areas where you were kind of just entering, or places that again tend to be more conservative? How did y'all address that?
Yeah, we had in Montpelier, actually, which is the capital city, we had some like pretty serious resistance organizing from an organization called the Shalom Alliance, which is like an Israel lobby group that's based in Vermont, and has a lot of money and resources to be able to like put out alternative messaging that was against AFC. And we saw that it really failed in Montpelier. And that was also a place where there was not a strong organizing committee of local folks who were like on the ground and like had relationships. So again, I want to I feel like really drum in that like thing about forming relationships. Like everybody has relationships in your locales and your towns, and like drawing on those to start having conversations and gauging where people are at is a great start if you're starting at like 0 or before in terms of knowing what your base is. So that, and definitely in like some of the more rural towns where there was like a fair amount of conservative messaging, it was those relationships and like people showing up and like hosting conversations, having food, having community potlucks, having info sessions that really started to break down barriers and create some pretty cool change.
Well, thank you both so much. I think we'll wrap here the panelist section and go into some resources, but thank you all again so much. And if y'all in the chat, definitely share your appreciations to Noel and Samia, and definitely follow their campaigns. We're going to send out material and links where you can follow their campaigns and organizations in a follow-up email. So thank you both again so much. And just before we get back to things, there are a couple questions that were raised that I think we can answer in this section around resources. One is, where can we find a concise list of which places or institutions have investments? I think you'd have to do that research, locally. You can use different databases. So there is the investigate.info database where you can like look up or input a portfolio, and it can be scanned and you can find like what's in it. You also have like the divestment list that I think is on afsc.org/divest. We sent those resources in the chat, but you can find like what companies would be good to that are on the divestment list. But in terms of finding out where those investments take place, I think that's up to the research. I think the other thing is like, even if you don't really have a lot of that research, if you want to push for divestment, I think you still can, because again, the proactive way you can do it is to say, I want my city or I want my institution to adopt an ethical investment policy so that in the future they are not investing in or contracting with any companies that are in violation of human rights or involved in the genocide or involved in arms, manufacturing or whatever. So I think there are ways to like still approach those things in a proactive way. There's a question about canvassing, like how do we canvass and like what materials do we use? Great question. We have a training coming up, which we'll talk about in a second. And then around national divestment campaign, I think the campaign to divest is broad and it is national, but I think we can also think about like priority targets or areas where we feel like we can really push this through, and like places that we feel like have support or where we could build that support. And we also always highlight like some of the priority 3 targets that we have been thinking about, like in a general sense, have been Maersk, which is the shipping company, transporting weapons, transporting military cargo to Israel, Chevron, and Israel bonds that Noel spoke about. So anyways, we'll get started on, I just want to share with you all some of our resources. We have an updated divestment city council toolkit. So if we can go to the next slide, we will send out these links again, but these have like key strategy questions that you can ask yourself before starting a campaign. We have a bunch of materials, including the BNC's toolkit, the AFSC's divestment guide, USCPR's Stop Gaza Genocide toolkit, info on, these case studies that we're learning from, different recommendations from, case studies that we've been hearing from. And we kind of update this periodically. So it's pretty updated and it has a lot of materials if you're interested in taking up a campaign at your city level, specifically divestment. If we go to the next slide, we also have our tax day resources. So tax day is coming up on April 15th. We have a website with your tax day toolbox. Our goal with Not My Tax Dollars campaign is to educate as many people as possible about U.S. military funding to Israel and why it's important that we end it. And we have like a call to action, which is if you can, start or ramp up a local divestment campaign on tax day. Or if you don't have a campaign, you can just start sparking these conversations on a local level by, doing some canvassing or wheat pasting flyers or doing kind of what Noel was talking about, like these, like stickers or little flyers with like, your city, like what would you do with this money that's invested in Israel right now? Like what would you do with that money? What would you rather have it be spent on? So this is like the resource where you can find all the information on ways to take action for tax day. And we can go to the next slide. With tax day coming up on April 15th, someone asked about canvassing, which is great because we have a training coming up. You can use canvassing as a way to engage your neighbors, to share information about where our tax dollars go, to build your local base of supporters who will advocate for divestment. And in this training, we're going to cover like why canvassing is critical to building winning campaigns. We're going to go through like messaging and framing, like how to craft compelling conversations that resonate with different audiences, how to handle tough questions and opposition. We're going to do some role playing and have some time for practice, and how to like follow up with people to sustain the momentum. So please register for this. It's on April 3rd. We have this canvassing training. You can go to uscpr.org/canvas and register there. And again, we'll send all of this in an email follow-up, so don't worry about having to capture everything. You will get this in an email, these links and these resources. And also like, any materials that we have following this webinar on tax day, we will also send that out in an email. Okay, I'll pass it to the next slide. I think I'll pass it to Kat to finish off the webinar with information on how to register your tax day action. So yeah, we just have this like, how to register your tax day action. If you just go to this link, you can register whatever you're going to do on tax day, and then I'll pass it to Kat to take it from here.
Great. Thank you so much, Celine. I'm going to walk through a couple of our digital resources that you could use while you're planning your local divestment campaign or ramping it up for tax day. One of them is if you're planning to do some kind of action or demonstration around tax day, whether that is like packing the room and getting everybody to show up at city council on the same day and give their speeches and testimonies to your city or town council. Or if you're doing some other kind of creative demonstration or event to target your local government officials and pressure them to divest, you can register your action on this page, this tax day action map. And I'm going to show you just a quick example here. So this is what the map looks like. So as people begin to announce their actions and add their actions here, a list will start to populate, and you'll be able to see where across the US people are hosting their tax day actions. And once you decide on an action to host around tax day, all you're going to do is go to this button right here and click to host. And from there, you'll see some host guidelines around tax day, just related to how to set up a digital event, and click OK. And then you can enter the title of your event, the date and time, location, and a description. But essentially, this is a great way to publicize your tax day action event, because once you fill out this form and enter it, it will show up at this link, which we will be sharing around widely. So then it'll make it easier for other people in your community who are looking to find an action to look up their location and find your action. And there's also a customizable social media graphic on this tax day resources page as well to publicize your campaign and whatever action you're planning to do as you ramp up for tax day. And then one other piece I wanted to show is how to set up a digital action tool to amplify your campaign. So this is a very useful tool if you are starting a campaign to pressure your local councils to divest, and you want to show the really wide support from the community and the really high number of people who support, you can create a digital action tool that will email your city council elected officials and ask them to divest. And then you can share that tool all around in your group chats, on your social media, with your neighbors, and tell everybody to send a letter to their city council members as a way to increase that pressure. So one free resource you could use to create a digital action tool is actionnetwork.org. This is a good one. This is much better than doing a change.org type of petition, because you could create your own letter writing campaign that will send those emails to your city council members. And this is just a quick look at what it looks like here. Here we go. So when you go to actionnetwork.org, you can sign up to create a free account. They do let grassroots activists and organizers create their own free account to create action alerts like this. And then from there, you can set up your own letter campaign. So when you start organizing, you're going to want to click actions and then letter campaign. And from there, you could enter the title, you could enter a description to encourage people to take action. And then on the next page, you could enter kind of the sample email, which will be the email that people get when they enter their information. So just similar digital action tools you've probably seen around before, like this one where you click start writing and you get a sample message, just like that. So you could write your own message as a sample message that you want people to send to their elected officials. So this is a great tool that we encourage you to use to really ramp up the pressure on your elected officials. And with that, I will pass it back to Celine.
Hey everyone, sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties with my video, so I'll just finish this off without it. Just the final tool I want to share is our People's Arms Embargo Toolkit. And this just includes just some information on putting direct pressure on corporations to end their complicity in Israel's genocide. So we talked a lot about cities and government pressure, and this is just some resources specifically around corporations, if that's of interest to any of you here. And we just wanted to include that as well. I think with that, we could actually close out a bit early. Thank you all again for joining and for taking the time to stay through us speaking through the resources. Again, really, really encourage people to register for our canvassing training. That's on April 3rd. Think about ways you can take action in your city on tax day. Check out our tax day resources page. And maybe start thinking about that. We also have our interest form where you can express your interest or level of interest around what you want to do on tax day. And we have the link for where you can register your tax day action. And again, we'll send this all out in a follow-up email. But thank you all again so much for joining, and for Noel and Samia for sharing your campaign case studies. It's really good to hear about wins that our organizations have made on a local level around Palestine, especially in this moment where we're also campaigning for, the release of Mahmoud Khalid and an end to the repression of the Palestine movement. So thank you all again so much, and we'll see you at our next call, which is April 3rd for canvassing.